Welcome back. Still tuned in to Salam Media, your home of humanitarian journalism. The name of the show is News and Views with myself, Salilo Makwidiri. And we'll be now shedding light into a very, very interesting subject. I think when you think of elephants, you're probably thinking about, these big, majestic animals roaming across Africa's vast savanna, and not on the chopping block. But in Zimbabwe, that's precisely what's on the table. Quite literally, the country's wildlife authority has announced plans to cull around 200 elephants due to severe drought conditions and food shortages. And this has sparked a heated debate between survival and conservation. Is this a necessary evil to feed a hungry nation, or just a short-sighted solution to a much, much bigger problem? Joining us in a bit to unpack this issue is Victor Kgomoeswana, marketing and communications expert from the University of Limpopo. Victor, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Hi, Slilo. Good talking to you, man.
Yeah, I think when I first came across this headline, I was a bit gobsmacked. Zimbabwe is undeniably facing a food crisis, but culling 200 elephants in a bold step, and I think something that we've never seen before. Do you think the authorities are making the right decision in framing this as a solution for both human hunger and the environmental strain that it is quoted that these elephants have in Zimbabwe?
I cannot make that judgment, but I have to ask any listener or viewer, if you are a human being and you are faced with a starving nation, would you spare the elephants and rather have people dying from hunger? I don't think elephants would ever doubt. The lions would never spare an antelope because they feel it's not a human, it's not kind to the animals. I don't think it's even a drought issue, Salilo. Honestly, it's the mismanagement or the management of wildlife and natural resources in Africa just gone awry, because Zimbabwe is not alone in this culling of 200 elephants. Namibia had a similar situation. I think 700 they are culling. Botswana had a similar thing 3 to 4 years ago, where they were also culling the elephants, which means there is something wrong with the rate at which the population of elephants and other animals might be growing relative to what the African natural vegetation can support. In zoology, or in ecology, there's something called carrying capacity. Every piece of land has a finite number of animals that it can support. You know how much elephants eat, you know how many plants you have, you know the rate at which the plants are growing. And like all farmers will tell you, Salilo, when you are farming in cattle, every farmer will tell you the biggest responsibility or the biggest skill that you need is how to manage the grass. Think about that for 1 second. When you are farming and producing any kind of animal, cattle, goats, sheep, the biggest expertise that you need is how to manage the grass on which those animals will feed. So these are not domestic animals, elephants, but in Africa, because of its tourism, they are found mainly in parks, which means it's a resource that African governments must manage, just like a sheep farmer or a cattle farmer would manage them. By that, I'm saying has been out of kilter. Tinashe Farao said something very interesting when he talked to CNN, and that Zimbabwe in this same report is said to have close to 90,000, over 80,000 elephants, the second largest population of elephants in the world. And yet the carrying capacity that I'm talking about, in other words, the number of elephants that the natural vegetation of Zimbabwe can support is 45,000, which means even before the drought, there were already too many elephants. And the question is, how did the people responsible for wildlife, especially the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Authority, let this situation get to this point? The drought situation is a climate change issue that nobody can really control. And I'll close the opening remarks by saying what I said at the beginning. I don't see how human beings can look at wild animals and fail to eat them if people are really dying of hunger. especially if those wild animals are nearly 2 times the population size that can be supported by the natural vegetation or the biosphere of Zimbabwe.
I think one concerning thing for me when I read the story was the fact that we always read reports about how elephants are the obvious targets for poaching, how they are classified as endangered. Wouldn't be the alternative being you have countries like South Africa, who have a vast space. You have the Kruger National Park and all the other parks across South Africa, across the continent. You want to protect this species. It's increasingly becoming a target of poaching, for their tusks and all of that. Wouldn't that be a better option? Wouldn't that, sell? So some of these elephants to reserves and nature parks all across the continent, all across the world, because elephants are majestic. Everyone loves them. They love to see them, and they make big business.
But there's your point. You are exactly talking about what we are saying. The management of wildlife is a much more complex and a much more comprehensive enterprise than we give it credit for. South Africa, you're right, has the Kruger Park. In fact, Selailo, don't even talk about the Kruger Park. Zimbabwe, Botswana, and South Africa already have what is called a trans-frontier park, which means if you are in the Kruger Park in the north of South Africa, you don't need to be crossing any border because the parks have been made trans-frontier, which means they cut across the border of South Africa and Zimbabwe. And same thing with Botswana, same thing with that. In the spirit of intra-Africa trade, you're right, there should be a way that wildlife authorities across Africa can talk amongst themselves and study the vegetation. Zimbabwe might be having a challenge, but maybe DRC doesn't. DRC might not be, but maybe Rwanda might not. And because of the tropical nature of countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, DRC, Tanzania, I am sure with better management of the wildlife resources, there could have been a solution here. But by now, if the Zimbabwean population of elephants is already twice what the country can carry, you're right. It's going to have to be an intra-Africa collaboration that will maybe solve this problem, especially if Namibia has already got a similar problem and Botswana has a similar problem. So maybe the control of the population growth is more central to this because elephants are big eaters. They consume a lot per capita. So even if you take them to other countries, you still have to manage responsibly the number of the elephants that you take there, because by themselves, elephants can eat up a fair bunch in any forest.
What do you think are some of the key failures that can be attributed to this spiraling of the population of these animals? And is it something that could have been mitigated, or it's something that the authorities in Zimbabwe had no control over? It's just something that happened, and the culling of these elephants is the last resort that they could have reached.
Okay, there are 2-3 sides to the question you're asking, but bottom line is Zimbabwe since 1990, I'll say, has been in a political turmoil of sorts, since land reform started. And I'm not appraising or criticizing land reform because it's necessary to have land justice. But since 1990 or so, when the land reform process started, or maybe at least 2000, Zimbabwe has been in a political crisis, which means the government has not functioned optimally. Either you had President Mugabe fighting MDC, and then MDC fighting amongst itself, and then you had President Emerson Mnangagwa coming over. But if you remember, elections were always being held, and there would be protests, and those protests would be silenced, sometimes through means that led to the loss of lives. Zimbabwe hasn't been politically stable, and when political stability is compromised, many other aspects of the state will be compromised. And one of them is management of wildlife, especially because wildlife is human beings interfering in nature. And if you're going to interfere in nature, then you must be much more organized and a lot more efficient. So that is the one failure. The second part is exactly that. Even with a politically stable country like Namibia, A politically stable country like Botswana, you have a similar problem, which means it's not just about the political situation in Zimbabwe, it's about the resources management of Africa, especially natural resources. I want to know, when wildlife authorities, parks boards of these different countries meet, what do they talk about? Do they discuss this? I'm sure they do. But as often in Africa, Selailo, people will talk about what needs to be done. They will formulate very good policies. And when it comes to implementation, they fall flat. The third thing is agriculture. Although this is tourism and wildlife, it's still part of agriculture because it's part of using natural resources to produce food, either food for the human beings or food for the animals themselves, because they are part of tourism. If you know that you have wildlife as a money spinner because of tourism and elephants are under threat, the last thing you want is to just not manage those resources specifically. African countries decided nearly 10 years ago and committed themselves, Slilo, to put aside a certain percentage of their GDP, respective GDPs. I forget what they call the agreement. That was supposed to be followed through. And if you put aside 1 or 2% of your GDP for the management of agriculture, to grow agriculture, this should have been part of it. And that you wouldn't have the food insecurity. Knowing that climate change is real, African countries should have been spending a lot more money to learn other techniques of producing food. We know about vertical farming, where you don't need a lot of space. There are cities, like crowded cities like Tokyo, that don't have a lot of space, but they use every space to do what is called hydroponic farming, which means you farm with very little water. All these things are known in Africa, Selailo, and they are being talked about every day. But it's the lack of follow through, the lack of implementation, and the lack of monitoring that will make us always know what's right, but not do it until there's a crisis like this one.
I want to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to stick with the theme. The fact that there's no follow through, and the people that are in authority in the industry are not necessarily doing the right things, because I have a sense that this is a regional problem. You mentioned Botswana, Namibia also. I'm reading here that they've recently culled around 83 elephants and plan to kill hundreds more in the coming months. Regionally, as SADC, we pride ourselves as having the big five, and wildlife being very, very key to our economy. But if things like this happen, then surely regionally there's something that we're getting wrong. So maybe my question when we come back would be, is there a problem regionally when it comes to the SADC countries, when it comes to effectively managing their wildlife, which is a very important key source of income? But we'll touch on that after this short break.
Stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Hey, Gulam.
Yeah?
Did I return your lawnmower last month?
No.
No. Now what'll I do? I wanted to borrow it again, man.
With Randry Jewelers, you won't have to borrow or lend because the prices are so well trimmed on all gold and diamond jewelry. Alternatively, we could remake your old jewelry into a brilliant design. Visit Randry Jewelers at 151 Stevens Lamini Road, Musgrave, Durban. Randry Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Now, feeling of closeness to Allah that we feel by the end of Ramadan. Ramadan is over, but that closeness doesn't have to be. The deeds most loved by Allah are those done regularly, even if they are small. So don't let go of that feeling. Give a small amount regularly and hold on to Allah's love. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable. as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Albeit has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albeitlodge.co.za.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty. Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, and that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
Searching for elite local and international investment and advisory services from an award-winning firm? Look no further than the Belmont Mayer Group, your gateway to unparalleled investment and wealth management. At Belmont Mayer, we believe in the art of wealth creation, a meticulous process fueled by our unwavering commitment to excellence. With a focus on providing elite alternative investments and quality advice, we also pride ourselves on maximizing value for our esteemed investors as seen through our consistent outperformance. Your financial success is our top priority. Join us at Belmont Mayer and experience the difference firsthand. Ready to embark on a journey of greatness? Contact us today. Reach out to the Belmont Mayer Group on 078 786 1698. Call or WhatsApp or email us at info@belmontmayer.com. Elevate your financial future with Belmont Mayer, where every detail matters.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Welcome back. Still tuned in to Salam Media with myself, Salalo Makwidiri. We are exactly at 8:30, and we're at the back end of our conversation with marketing and communications of the University of Limpopo, Victor Kgomoeswana. And we're talking about Zimbabwe's Wildlife Authority. They've made an announcement that they plan to cull around 200 elephants to address a severe food shortage triggered by the ongoing drought. And the move is intended to provide sustenance to residents facing hunger. And this is a discussion which has sparked a lot of debate, especially amongst conservationists. And Victor is joining us to try and unpack that. Victor, thank you so much for staying with us. I think before I went to the break, I was talking about how this is seemingly becoming a regional issue. I myself am from Limpopo. I know just the importance of wildlife and the tourism income that it brings to communities that are close to these resorts and these national parks. But why is it not effectively managed? Namibia is doing the same thing. 83 elephants have been culled already. They plan to cull a few more. Zimbabwe is doing the same thing. And Botswana, as you mentioned also. What's wrong? Why can't we get it right? Why can't we get this industry that we're seemingly so proud of and is bringing in thousands and thousands, if not millions, when it comes to income, injecting it to probably some of the most rural and poorest regions of our countries?
I would say one of the areas, apart from just making a generic statement that there are policies that are not being implemented, is the failure of African public-private partnerships. By that, I mean governments have not learned to take advantage of the expertise and the resources that are there in the private sector. I'm just looking at, you might see I'm looking down at something here. It's the SADC, and I know because I did facilitate some of these sessions for SADC, the Southern African Development Community Tourism Program. The time frame is 2020 to 2030. And it was adopted around 2019. And it wasn't the first time that people got together, countries got together to talk about this. It has got strategies, goals, strategies, and activities. It's got goals, about 5 goals, and goal number 3. In fact, goal number 1 is stimulating visitor movement and flows to and within the region, which means already countries working together. Goal number 2 is improving and defending the tourism reputation and image. I can skip that. Number 3 is very interesting. Developing tourism in trans-frontier conservation areas. These are the points that I'm talking about, and it has 3 strategies, 1 being the market development program, 2 being the investment promotion program, and 3 being what is called rural economic inclusion program, which means launching community-based initiatives to ensure that the benefits of tourism can flow into the communities adjacent to the trans-frontier conservation areas. This means, Selailo, that somebody in all 15 African countries, the SADC countries, knows that already there are trans-frontier parks. And if you're going to work on trans-frontier park, it means you presuppose inter-country collaboration or intra-Africa collaboration. And that's what's not happening. But because I know these tourism programs are not developed by governments alone, they are developed in partnership with consultants, with multilateral agencies like the United Nations or the particular agency called UNWTO, World Tourism Organization, then the private sector. I suppose the failure is the resolve on the part of the governments to take advantage of the expertise that is there in the private sector, because private sector companies in SADC are running very successful business programs. They are collaborating with one another. By that, I mean they are able to share tourism figures. They are able to exchange statistics and plan jointly so that people in Zimbabwe can move over to South Africa, people in Zambia can move over to Malawi, and so on. So maybe the failure is the lack of that public-private collaboration, where the government, where it comes up short on capabilities, it can take advantage of what the private sector can offer. It's just one other reason apart from the general failure to follow through on policies, because I just read from a strategy that's not a country strategy, it's a SADC strategy, meaning Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana are all members of this. In fact, the secretariat of SADC is in Botswana.
No, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. But before I let you go, how does elephant meat taste?
I don't know if I've tasted it, because, you know, you go to certain restaurants where they tell you you are eating crocodile, you are eating this. So I'm sure I would have tasted it somewhere, maybe just not knowing that it's elephant meat. But it doesn't look like it's anything that phases real meat lovers. Carnivores out there will tell you meat is meat is meat. And I'm sure if they cooked it and didn't tell you, Selailo, you might just be dancing thinking you are eating a beef brisket.
Oh, all right. Maybe I should head out to Zimbabwe. Victor Kgomoeswana, Marketing Communications, from the Marketing Communications Department of the University of Limpopo. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
It's been a pleasure.
There we go. Yeah, really interesting stuff, eh? Around 200 elephants planned to be culled by Zimbabwe's government. And the meat will be given to people of Zimbabwe who are currently facing a drought and severe starvation and hunger. Have you ever tasted elephant meat, Puti? No? If you ever tasted elephant meat, maybe you can give us feedback. How does it taste? Can, maybe join, take a trip down to Zimbabwe, get a little scuffed in. Hey, never know. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be speaking to we'll be joined by Patrick Kelly. He's the Chief Director for Price Statistics at Stats SA. And we'll be touching on a bit of good news for South African consumers. The cost of living is seemingly easing up. The latest figures from Statistics South Africa show that the Consumer Price Index, CPI, has dropped to 4.4%. More on that after this short break.